Vinit, thank you for joining me on the Security Space podcast today. What we will be discussing is how to grow an effective go-to-market strategy. But before we kick off, Vinit, please tell us a little bit about yourself, if that's okay.
Sure thing. Well, thanks for having me, first of all. My name is Vinit. I'm one of the revenue leads at Aikido Security. I started working. We're a startup based in Ghent in Belgium. I'm actually based in London. I started working in startups about 15 years ago when I started my own startup, and was a co-founder of for nearly 12 or 13 years. In that time, it was in the ed tech space, so very different to security work. Didn't think I'd ever, need to know about software security, frankly, for much of that time, until we got to the point where we started to land larger contracts, started to have to service bigger customers, enterprise organizations, started to have to take a lot of data security, information security a lot more seriously, and realized the huge impact that then has on engineering and product teams in particular, and obviously the wider business and wider organization. And when I first came across Aikido about a year ago, I was like, oh my goodness, there's enough of the technical stuff of what you're doing that I'm aware of that I could see having a huge impact. But actually, there's so much on the non-technical side that was a real pain in the backside for me. I was like, okay, you guys are really sort of hitting a spot, mostly because the co-founders in our business had been there and done that as CTOs, as engineering and product leads in other organizations, and realized that too many small and medium-sized businesses in particular were being sort of hamstrung by really crappy, expensive stacks of security products and software.
Yep.
And they just were kind of, going nowhere, flying blind. Developers were being fatigued by alerts all over the place. And so our core philosophy is around sort of no BS security. Like, we just want to give developers what they need when they need it and get out of the way. We're happy when developers aren't spending time in our product and doing the things that they need to do for their teams and their businesses.
Absolutely. No, I've heard a lot of stuff about Aikido, the great work that they're doing. So I'll be sure to put information down below if anybody wants to check them out. So whilst it pretty much might be your bread and butter, Vinit, I'm pretty much just going to pick your brains today on how to grow an effective go-to-market strategy, because I know that you've done this in numerous places now. Like you say, you're very, very familiar with the startup world. So pretty much bring me back to maybe even your first experience. So I'm sure that you've learned different strategies along the way. But when you first, founded your first company, there's different things that you also need to consider, whether that's your R&D, your marketing, or what we'll highlight today, the go-to-market. Where do you begin? Vinit?
Yeah, big question, right? I think you've always got to start, in my opinion, with a problem that you're trying to solve for people that really care about it. And oftentimes that's a problem that you've experienced yourself, right? So every startup that I've ever worked in, or run or invested in, so I've done probably a dozen or so startup investments over the years, or supported through friends and colleagues, etc. The vast majority of times it's a problem that's been felt very acutely by that individual because they were there in that position before, or maybe are still there, right? Like, so obviously that's a great place to start, because you should hopefully then know and understand the problem, but it's not always the case, right? So sometimes you might observe a problem or a challenge that others are facing, and through proximity, because you talk to them or they're in your lives, you work for them or you work with them, you can see that there's something different that needs to be done or could be done. And certainly our business, the business that I first started, Filtered, it was the origins of that business back in 2008, 2009 was around helping people learn Microsoft Excel better for business business application, right? So I was very good at it, but self-taught, a few friends who became my co-founders, same experience there. And we're like, oh my goodness, there's so many people around us that use this thing every day.
Yeah.
And there's probably like a handful of basic things, critical things that you could learn, and it would like really like magnify what you're trying to do. And so for us, that was like the thing that we felt. And so we went really deep on that problem. And then like within 5 years, we were then creating learning and development software for larger businesses. And that's when I started to really feel like I was out of my depth, because I wasn't familiar enough with the core problem. So then we had to like really learn it. And there's an advantage to that as well, right? Like you can be somewhat blissfully ignorant of some of the things, and that's the strength as well, right? So it's a very hard balance to strike. But I think, there's nothing more compelling in the businesses that I've seen that have done really well than being as intimately familiar with the problem as you possibly can be. And that's certainly the case at Aikido. Like our CTO CEO Willem, for example, the engineering team, the product team, they are essentially building a product for themselves because we care very deeply about helping developers and engineers, not security professionals. Security professionals in much larger teams are very important, but in most small and medium-sized organizations, up to a few hundred developers, for example, you're not going to have the luxury of an army of security professionals. And so the onus is therefore on engineers and developers to try and build as securely as possible, building sort of security by design. And those are the people that we focus on. And so it's great when developers in our own team are able to push things that delight themselves, because there's a good chance it's going to delight our customers and our users as well. So that's my long-winded way of saying, get as intimately familiar with the problem that you're trying to solve and build a business around as you possibly can do.
Yeah, no, fantastic point. And I've had chats sort of similar to this, and it's sort of like timing is very sort of pivotal when it comes to the startup world. About, okay, is your product, firstly, is there a place for it in the market, and is the market mature enough for your product to exist? So right now, as we speak in 2024, AI, but if you would have had that chat sort of, I don't know, even as early as sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago, AI products, maybe there might not have been a massive demand for it, as opposed to right now, where it's like, okay, you throw AI in front of a CISO, it's like, okay, yeah, I need to take this seriously. So I understand completely about sort of your first experience with Filtered, like you say, the timing was right, and therefore you was able to create this product from it.
But we also experienced, actually, really interestingly. So we started to build for that industry. It was actually quite futuristic in a way. We were building very basic AI models back in 2014. Right? So initially it was a recommendation system. Then it went into more machine learning led recommendations. So this was around like 2014 to 2016, 2017. When we started to take that product to market, we did wonder, are we just too early for this market, right? And I think the same would have been the case in security and machine learning approaches, certainly recommendation systems as they were back then. They were relatively novel, and their applications were relatively limited. And most people didn't really understand it, but they were very good at what they were able to do for that moment in time. But yeah, now that the general consensus around AI has evolved massively, mostly through like consumer applications and just better understanding, it's hard to ignore now, right? So in a way, now's probably a better time to be doing that than maybe 5 or 6 years ago, to your point. So yeah, timing is everything, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to pick on your point that you mentioned there, with Aikido and the team currently at there at the moment. I know that you kind of mentioned there that you're kind of making the product for yourselves in a way. So what I'm going to ask yourself is, how do you even? So firstly, you've got this product and you think that it solves this problem that you've spotted in the market. How do you then identify an ICP based on this?
Yeah, great question. So if we just sort of take one step back and just talk about the problem that we were initially solving. So Aikido 2-3 years ago was an idea from Willem, our CTO CEO, who'd exited a good number of HR tech startups, actually, mostly up until that point. And he had a few really annoying situations where, especially in HR tech, you're having to manage and be responsible for tons of sensitive personal information, and obviously the stakes are even higher in Europe. And so he had, he'd hired in some security engineers that were running like a full open source stack at one point. 1 or 2 of those engineers left, and he was then left with like a load of stuff that some people knew intimately, but most of the others didn't. And so he sort of made a vow to himself that once I'm through these businesses, I really want to sort of scratch my own itch and build something that is a lot more resilient. Is easier for people to understand, and crucially, wasn't alerting developers left, right, and center. I mean, that was partly the reason why he had to go away and build it himself a few businesses ago. It's because there was nothing on the market that was quite hitting his need. And he won't mind me saying this, but he is absolutely obsessed with developer productivity and developer experiences. And so for him, if you see a developer getting blocked on something, fair enough. But if you see a developer getting blocked on something that they could very easily and safely ignore, then oh my goodness, that's just value like destruction, right? What is the point of that? You're just like killing everything. And so that's what Aikido first was. It was around detecting false positives, which really surprisingly, so I was relatively new to that bit of the problem. When I first became familiar with it, I was just like, hang on a sec, surely these companies that have raised gazillions of dollars, literally billion-dollar valuation businesses have been created off the back of that. How are they not solving this? This is like table stakes, and they just weren't, and they just aren't, because they haven't obsessed about this problem in the way that we have. And so figuring that out and really understanding that for someone who knew bits about security and compliance and the workload that it takes engineering teams to do that, but not as intimately as, say, an engineer. Me coming into that, the definition around the ICP, around the pain, and how we activate the market to really pay attention to this, what became like one of the main challenges, right? And so it was around, so obviously you do all the other things around, creating inbound marketing. I mean, it all feeds into that, right? Getting the message straight and aligned. So through just talking to lots of developers myself, people that I'd worked with or hired, friends, it became very clear that those that needed to take this stuff seriously, which is an increasing number, right? But especially those in regulated environments, if they are in like a fintech, a health tech, a legal tech, those that are dealing with or responsible for sensitive data of some kind, and or are servicing either hundreds of thousands or millions of end users and or like large organizations, that kind of profile of a business was close to our sweet spot, right? It was like an ICP. And then on top of that, you've got the kind of usual compliance standards around InfoSec for ISO 27001 and SOC 2. So those became like additional cherries on the cake, on the icing. So then we were able to build our ICP, right? So within a month or so of me joining this business, it was very clear what the ICP should be. It was like these 5 to 7 things, obviously some stuff around like size of business, where we knew that we could play very well, right? Like what we were not going to do and still have no real ambitions to do, because frankly the market's big enough, is try and become like that huge enterprise player. There are enough already there, and what that requires you and your product and your team to do is very different, right? I've made that mistake before. I've seen far too many startups sort of die going after big household logos. When actually, if you focus on your strengths, and if you know what your strengths are and the market that can serve, then you can actually build a great business, and you can have a great product, and you can do some cool stuff. So that's generally been our approach. Obviously, understand the problem really well, figure out what your own strengths and capabilities are as an organization, as a product, as a team, and then match that to the market. And hopefully enough circles are crisscrossing and intersecting that what's left in the middle is meaningful, interesting, and fun to go after.
Really interesting point. And now that you've got that, how do you then is it then down to sort of yourself and the board to essentially communicate that to sort of like the sales team, to the R&D team, to the marketing team that look, this is our identity, this is what Aikido is, and this is what we are in the market. And then is it sort of down to the sales team then to just go out and sort of like attack the ICP, or in a startup, can you not be as rigid as that, and you kind of be like, look, we have an ICP, but look, we're still a startup, we still have bills to pay, and until we sort of get to like even sort of Series B, Series C, IPO, exit, we can never sort of be too rigid, or does that dilute the product? My question in a roundabout way is like, you've got an ICP, you've got an identity, but you've also got bills to pay and objectives, and how do you sort of scale up correctly, but also keep the bills being paid, essentially? How
Yeah,
do you sort
sure.
of balance that conflict?
Yeah. Yeah, I get what I see what you're getting at. So like ideally the target the market you're trying to target is big enough and easy enough to access,
Yes.
and that you can access it like relatively efficiently, right? So that your cost of acquisition isn't too high, that you're not going to burn through, half of your previous raise just trying to get to that point, and then things never get to plan anyway. Then squeaky bum time, and you got to raise again, and you got to do a down round. All that stuff is really annoying, right? But you've got to think about it as a founder, as a even if you're a team member, especially a senior team member, whether you're on the board, however you're involved in the business as a stakeholder, even as a customer, right? Like a lot of customers, it's great that they sort of they will use startups in their stack, but they're taking a bit of a bet, right? So lots of people involved in that business will have that sort of a concern or question. Really, you have to iterate your way ultimately, right? So sure, you might have a very strong idea, as did we. We really thought it would be like tiny teams and startups, but actually very quickly realized as we started to build more of the product that we could naturally go up market. And that's what most startups end up doing, right? Unless they've got a really good network already through personal experience into the top end of their market, most people start at the bottom and end up going up, right? Inevitably. And so to be able to do that well and cost efficiently is the aim of the game.
Yes.
For us with Aikido, a lot of that's happened this year very naturally, which has been great. So it's really good to see all of the metrics pointing up and to the right, multiples of growth in all areas of the business. But fundamentally, that's only possible if your product, does what it says on the tin.
Yes.
So you can have the best marketing in the world, and you can land some great first customers, but when it comes to renewal time later that month or next year, then you're going to lose a lot of those guys unless you can really make up the promise, right? So better to just make sure you've got as good a product as you possibly can.
Yes.
But you're never going to have the complete product. And so the thing that, again, because we obsess about developer productivity, our developers and our engineers are not like degrees or separations from our users or customers. We have got developers and engineers picking up support tickets every day, and that just blew my mind. I was like, a few weeks in, I was like, hang on a sec, just turn on the AI bot thing on intercom, right? Like, let's just save developers time. And Willem, our CTO, was like, no. I want our developers and engineers to feel the pain of our end users in order to optimize the product to make it fully productized, right? And so it's an absolute joy when we even just demo the product, let alone have engineers experience it properly, because they can see how well it's been crafted. And then when they're actually in there, like that Slack channel is always like being filled with positive praise by different end users from small companies or small shops and agencies, or one person bands right the way up to large multinational organizations. And so yeah, absolutely, like you want your business to grow, you want to kind of work into the GTM, you want your brand to be there, you want all the marketing effort to be there. But I think in this day and age, if you don't have the product to match that, and you don't have the people that are building that product close enough to their end users,
Yep.
then everything else just becomes longer and elongated and harder. Compressing it can really, shorten those critical feedback loops so that you can then just push stuff out even faster and further. That for me has been like a huge learning, and it's a hard thing to do. Like, it's a really hard thing to do. We've certainly tried to do that in previous businesses in the past, and it takes a lot of effort and energy. So it's not like you can just do this. You can just say we're going to do it and start doing it. You've actually really got to do it, and you've got to maintain that like day in and day out. It's not for the faint-hearted, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I say, it is also the beauty of the startup world. Like you say, having the developers so close to sort of like the sales front, and being sort of in touch of like you say, like seeing exactly what the customers are doing. It's kind of like you don't kind of get that at like maybe the massive sort of crowd strikes, checkpoints, whatever it might be. There might be like say CSMs that come in the middle of it or whatever it might be. But I think it's quite ingenious actually that, like you say, the developers are so close to the action. Therefore, like you say, when there is pains, you can push that through to the board very, very easily. And that sort of fully echoing your point, accelerates the development and it moves you guys forward on your journey as well, which in turn produces a better product, which the developers
it becomes a nice self-fulfilling cycle.
It makes sense. I like that model, and I like that sort of GTM strategy as well. Now, your experience then, Vinit, when a go-to-market strategy is not performing well, if you guys have had a bad year for whatever circumstances that it might be, firstly, how important is it to spot it early on? Secondly, what can you do about it? Is it immediately cost cutting, or is it okay, well, we just need to, like you say, double down what you mentioned in your previous point? How can you spot when you're having a bad year, and how quick do you act on it?
So that's like 90% of most startup businesses, right? Like in most people's times and experiences. Things never go to plan.
Yeah.
I mean, they just very rarely go to plan, and when they do, they don't really get to plan because of the reasons you thought they were going to go to plan, right? So it's really effing hard to one, predict it, and two, to work out how you're going to manage it, right? No training or course or exercise in risk management or mitigation is really going to like prepare you for that. Certainly not at this end of the market. Certainly not when you're a startup or a scale up, or a fast growing business of any kind, right? When you're like a huge conglomerate and you everything's like very well set in stone, of course you can predict things, usually with a lower degree of error, but at this end of the game you just can't. So I think you have to accept that you're going to have lots of bad patches, you're going to have lots of bad moments, and that things are going to go wrong for reasons that you just don't fully understand or can't quite comprehend at the time. And that certainly happened to me a lot in the last 15 odd years, in my own business, in other businesses, in this business. And it's how you respond and react that matters. That matters way more than like spotting it really early on, or like cost cutting, or like any of those other things that you might need to do, right? It's how you react to it, both as a leader, as an individual, as anyone that's connected with the project, the startup, that matters most. And obviously it's highly context dependent. So you can do some like good hygiene. Ideally there's some good sort of hygiene things in place. First of all, like having an idea of where you want to get to, right? It doesn't need to be a very well thought out or detailed plan, but if you can know in yourself and agree it with the people around you, right, between this and the end of the year, or this and next year, wherever it might be, we want to do these 3 things, okay, and try to keep it to a number that you can easily remember the detail behind, and so can your team and your colleagues, because then if they can't remember it, they're not even thinking about it and it's not important, therefore then no one's working on it, right? So why bother? So at any one moment in time, certainly our GTM team, sales and marketing in particular at Aikido, should know what we're shooting for as a revenue number by the end of the year, by the end of the quarter, what our approximate MRR is, how many customers we've got, how many more we need to, all this sort of top level figures they should know. And probably a good number of our product and engineering team know as well, and vice versa. Like, we should know what are the main product and engineering objectives for the business over the next quarter, over next year, right? Certainly if you've been here a little while, or you're part of that business. And then I think it's everyone's responsibility. It's certainly, if the culture supports it, and the best cultures do, that you're able to, no one person can have their eyes across everything. So it's a joint responsibility. I mean, that's the definition of working in a team, right? It's being jointly responsible and holding each other to account in the right way. So it becomes everyone's responsibility to check and spot for when things don't feel like they're going on the right track, right? Or aren't quite heading in the right direction, whether that's on a product side or support, or on the revenue front. Like, just the other day, I had a situation where one of our recent customers was just stuck in a bit of a loop. And I could just tell they were getting a bit more tetchy, and so I needed to raise the flag a little bit on that issue. And immediately, like, without lots of structure in place, our team responded extremely professionally and really quickly and directly, because they could sense that, one, the fact that I was flagging it, two, that this issue had been just sort of lingering for a little while, and three, it was part of a deployment that's still relatively like new. That, right, okay, look, we just need to like nip this in the bud and make sure that the customer gets what they need to get, and is essentially in a better place, right? So that's like a really minute, like micro example, but at the when you're zooming out a bit, you want to make sure that on a periodic basis you're able to connect the dots in terms of what you're doing, right? So if you were to ask me, how can you avoid, okay, things are all going well right now, for example, let's say, how can you avoid a situation in 6 months' time where things don't go right? Well, it's bloody hard to predict, but I could probably list half a dozen critical things that I've seen across the business that you'd want to make sure you've got some plan in place to try and avoid, right? Whether that's in terms of team capability, whether it's in terms of hiring and capacity, whether it's in terms of like burn and like making sure you've got enough money in the bank, whether it's in terms of making sure you're acquiring the right types of customers so they don't, put unprecedented demands on your team. Those are just like 4 things that obviously come to mind, and pretty much universally apply to most startups and scale-ups, right? So it's not, this isn't hard stuff. It's usually the same recurring 4, 5, 6 things across the main areas of the business that you should just be constantly checking in with, right? And so and everyone has that responsibility, like I say. So I think you should embrace it. If you're someone new to startups, or you're a bit junior early on in your career, lean into that and just ask anyone you can around you, especially your managers and your sort of more senior team members. Ask questions on those topics and start to get familiar with it. And if you're a bit more experienced, then it's your responsibility to make sure that you're also asking those questions and not just staying too tunnel vision. I think when I've run businesses and I've been a founder, I've always appreciated, like genuinely appreciated, others, whoever they are in the business, coming and asking, oh, how is this thing going on that side of the business? Because it shows not only that they've taken the time out to think about it themselves, that they're asking me, but they ultimately care. And I think that speaks volumes for the type of people that you want to have around you, right? Because you need people that care, that are going to share that responsibility with you if you're going to go anywhere.
Fantastic, an amazing answer there. And even just that answer in itself, I know that will be our preview clip. That, because you've taught me 3, 4 really good points there, so really interesting. One final question, and I'm just going to flip my previous one. Is, you founded your own startup, you're an investor in startups, you're working as a revenue lead for Aikido, which is a security startup. Why do you love the startup world so much? I maybe have put you in a box by saying love, because I'm sure it's caused some sleepless nights. But
yeah, that having kids, right?
exactly that. So I feel your pain with that one, Vinit.
But I actually sleep well, luckily, which slightly annoys my wife. So I've never had a sleepless night over, even when things are going very bad at work. I've generally been quite lucky that,
I bet your wife hates you for that.
yeah, she does. Yeah, it's somehow it's a gene in the paternal line in our family. Yeah, so I have wondered this, like, this wasn't, I'm not a startup fanboy, right? Like, a massive supporter of startups, and startups in the UK in the last 15 years that I've been involved with them have kind of gone like this, and then right, this last few years have been really, really tough. You know, everything post 2021 just been across the picture for the vast majority of us, and a big part of it comes. And again, this wasn't an intentional thing, it wasn't a conscious thing, but I grew up along with my 3 younger siblings, and we were all very close in age. We all grew up living above our parents' shops, right? So we lived there for about first 20 years of our lives, so until I was a young adult. Dad's a pharmacist, mum had a newsagent, and both next to each other, and we just lived above it. And so we were in those shops, those small businesses, every day. Like holidays, they're Christmas holidays, they're like, we're only closed for a couple of days, and so Monday to Sunday. So we were sort of thrust into that as kids, and then had to help out loads from a very young age, right? Just because it was a small family business, and I think a lot of that, just you get a lot of first-hand exposure to, that generation period. And generations before us, they've really done hard manual physical work, backbreaking stuff. So you see that, and you really appreciate that, the effort that others in your family will have put in for you, and the fact that we saw it, I think, was particularly potent. But then along with that comes a large degree of independence, and the ability to sort of chart your own course, whatever that might be. And so it's no surprise that as adults now, all 4 siblings have been significantly involved in running their own businesses for a good number of years, right? And that's really cool. Like, again, it wasn't, we were never told by our parents, you must go off and do this. In fact, they were telling us to go off and do that, right? And we ended up sort of doing things in a different direction, as you typically do. But that's what really does it for me, the fact that you can have a lot of impact. You don't need to have had direct experiences. You don't need to have raised tons of money or any money. Most of these businesses that I've been involved in were all bootstrapped. My own was bootstrapped for the first 6 years. And frankly, if you're able to, and obviously there comes a level of privilege, because you can't just go off and do these things. People have got bills to pay and mouths to feed and lives to live. But if you have some ability to be able to do things on your own, it's really good fun. It can be really good fun. And if it doesn't work out, and this is what I said to my younger brothers before they emigrated to the US as young adults themselves, so hey, what's the worst that can happen? Like, yeah, fine, you might lose a bit of money that you borrowed from mum and dad. Come back, and things will be okay, right? Like, we'll figure it out. And I think that's the thing that I would often try to say to myself as a founder, to my co-founders, to my bosses who are founders in this business, and others. If it's not quite going to plan, that's okay. Like, what's the worst that could happen, right? Like, we will figure out something else. So I think that sort of perspective and the resilience that sometimes comes along with that can be quite character forming as well. So yeah, that's my sort of roundabout answer on why I love startups.
Fantastic. No, great point. Perfect, Vinit, we've come to our time. So if anybody has any questions for Vinit that he's raised today, or would like to learn more about Aikido Security, I'll be sure to put all the information down below. But Vinit, once again, thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Nick. You've been wonderful. Cheers.